I intend in the next 15 or 20 minutes to talk about racism, genocide, war, slavery, and a number of unsettling topics. If those things bother you, I encourage you strongly to piss off right now. I am not angry. I'm just very tired, and I feel a lot of sad. I have been wrestling with the shadow and the savagery that underlies humanity, and I feel tired. Now, I don't claim that any of this is true. I claim it as what I sense. And for me, that's a very powerful thing. So, if you are one of those people that believes that all of those things I mentioned before are the fault of the males, and that embracing the goddess energy will free you from such savagery, likewise piss off now. See, personally, I find slavery bothers me. Now, by bother, I don't mean a subtle sort of thing. I consider it very close to the greatest crime that a human can do to another human, and possibly that any sentient can do to any other sentient. It is the greatest savagery, the greatest horror. It takes away the most fundamental piece of why each and every one of you is here. And so when I see it, it catches my attention. And I saw it a while back, a few months back in a children's game. And it startled me there. It is a game, an independent game made by just one or two people, where you as a person are stranded on some world, and you have to research technology, develop farming, and build a community, and so on. And for some reason, slavery is an intrinsic part of the game. The only way you can grow your colony is either to catch people, say someone else who's crashed on the planet, throw them in your jail and intimidate them until they become part of your group, or to wait until a slave ship goes past your planet and to buy slaves from them. And these slaves come and they make your colony grow. And it's not as if it's a bit part. You simply cannot grow. You cannot develop without having people to fill the roles your society needs in this game. And you cannot fill those roles without slavery. And it's not just that you're buying slaves. If there are people there that you have too many of and you can't afford to feed, and they don't fill a role you need, say you've got 3 farmers and you only need 2, you sell them to the passing slave ship. It doesn't matter that they've been part of your colony for years. Like, I don't need you anymore. Sell you into slavery. And this, see, I've watched a lot of people play this game. I even tried playing with it until I discovered the ubiquity of the slavery mechanic, and it was just too ugly. I've watched a lot of people play this game, and nobody complains. I haven't heard one person say, wait a minute, slavery, that's crazy. Why would we do that? Like, oh, well, I don't need this person, I'll sell them. Wait till the slave ship comes by and get rid of them. They have no problem with it. Now, lots of different people over the last 6 months I've known about this game. Not one of them have I heard complain about the fact that they're buying slaves or selling people into slavery. None of them. They're like, whatever, who cares? This, to me, seems pretty seriously screwed up. Yes? In this world, slavery is a very rare thing. There's really only about 2 places where it still remains. One is in children's games. Sometimes children will play, I'll make you a bet, and if you lose, you have to be my slave for today, and if I lose, I have to be yours. Sometimes children play these kinds of silly games, and by children I include people of sexual maturity, because sometimes people play sexual games that involve slavery. But they're just games, and at any point, someone could stop. And the other place you see it is in the most savage and primitive element in your world. Certain very wealthy people in your world still play with slavery. They buy people and torture them to death. But they do it under the table. If they were caught, they would be sent to prison or killed. Because your society recognizes that slavery is a corrupt and ugly thing. And every one of you would admit it. If you talk to any person out there and said, hey, I'm going to sell your family into slavery, you okay with that? They'd say, what? You're insane. And yet this game mechanic makes slavery just a fundamental part. And nobody, not one, says, well, this is wrong. It's as if in playing the game, the morality is just put on hold. Right? And I thought, all right, here, this person who made this is just insane. And somehow people aren't smart enough to realize it. And I set it aside. I put a pin in it to come back to it. In the last 2 weeks, I have found people playing 3 new space exploration games. And admittedly, I'm suspicious as soon as they call it a 4X game. Right? As soon as they say that part of the reason I'm doing this is to exploit people and to exterminate other races. And I think genocide, that's pretty fucking insane. Right? So I get suspicious when somebody calls it a 4X game. Extermination of an entire species doesn't sound like a game to me. And yet they do. They just throw away the morality completely. Yeah, kill them all, who cares? And I don't get it. But of those 3 games, one of them was so savage and so ugly and so racist and so violent from the very first seconds of the game that after a few minutes I just couldn't stand to explore it any further. It's just astounding. And the other 2, the ones I went far enough, both of them had slavery as a default mechanic. Space exploration games where there are entire species that are dedicated to slavery and selling people into slavery. And if you want, you can research that technology and buy slaves from them and have slaves. Not animals, right? Like horses that are quasi-intelligent, if at all, that you might use. No, sentient species that are captured and sold into slavery. Right, so in effect, I have looked at 5 games in the last 6 months that involve space exploration or developing communities or colonies on other worlds. 4 of those 5 have slavery as a default mechanic. This one makes it so fundamental you simply cannot play the game. You cannot progress if you're not dealing in slaves. Right? Now, to be as polite and gentle as I care to be about this, what in the bloody goddamn fucking hell are they thinking? This is insane. This is clinically out of control. Right? Slavery is so astoundingly unacceptable, even to the primitive morality of humans, that if someone were keeping slaves, they would be thrown in prison or killed. And yet in the games that you make for your children, 4 out of the 5 I have found in the past 6 months have slavery as a default mechanic. It's not, hey, here's an educational thing so you can explore the dark shadows of human history. This is the future. Oh, we're going to go out and colonize space and discover things. And the people playing it, oh, this is a cool game. You can build spaceships and explore things. Right? And yet, slavery is a default fucking mechanic in every one of them. This bothers me. No. I want to suggest this in a way that people can hear it. If cats became sentient, cats would have slaves. Cats, I mean, anybody who raises cats or has a cat knows cats think they're center of the universe and everyone should serve them. They go, oh, I'm God, give me what I want. Right? It's a horrible sentiment, but cats all seem to feel this way, and most people actually respect their cats for it. This kind of arrogance. If cats became sentient, they'd have slaves. If dogs became sentient, they wouldn't. Dogs don't understand slavery. Dogs understand the pack. They think, well, if you're dangerous, we kill you. If you're someone who can help us, become part of the pack, part of the family. You may be a low-standing member of the pack, but you're part of the family. And if you're willing to work, you're going to work your way up and become part of it. And so a sentient species that grew out of dogs wouldn't have slavery, cats would. Yes. I think that's easy enough for any but the simpletons among you to perceive. Now I want to suggest to you something else, because I have to come at this backwards to keep people from fighting too much. Men are like dogs. Women are like cats. I'm saying that slavery comes from the female energy, not the male. And all these people who say, well, if we just neutered all the males and, we all were part of the goddess energy. No. I have spent the night, well, longer than that, but last night I spent working on this. And I have been tracing slavery and genocide and warfare, which is wholesale slaughter of a people or a community, and the kind of attitudes that then lead to slavery, and all of them trace back to the savage energy piece just under the female node that we've talked about. There is male savage energy, but when I trace it back, it leads to things like kids torturing animals and vivisection and so on. Right? You think of some of the Nazi doctors and the horrifying experiments that they conducted on people. This stuff comes from the male energy, but the concentration camps, the Nazis taking over the world and creating the Third Reich, those things come from the female energy. And that is a totally impossible idea if you talk to most of the people in your world. But to any of you who's able to understand energy, I encourage you to trace it. I encourage you to look inside and see in yourself where such things come from. I encourage you to trace it out, and you'll see that these things, the savagery of oh, the Christian church and its crusades and its inquisition and torture of women and all of this stuff, the Muslim purges, the many kinds of organized savagery, I encourage you to trace them back. And if you are aware enough to sense, and if you can get past your own prejudice and bigotry, you will sense that the things that involve beating someone up, either one person or a small group beating someone up, or the progressively more savage version of that, which is, say, one doctor torturing someone in horrible ways, vivisection and abuse. Those things come from the primitive energy that predates the male. And that the organization and planning that is the most savage parts of religion, that is warfare in your world, that is genocide, that is racism and slavery, those things all come from the female energies. And that idea is absolutely crazy to most people, but as I said, if you're one of those, you should have turned this off a long time ago. This is what I sense. And my senses are astounding when it comes to developing these patterns. And this is what I sense. And it bothers me. I feel uncomfortable with it. Having been raised in a world where I was taught that women are feminine, polite, and kind, and to be defended, and men are savage. I have trouble with this idea. But this is what I sense, and I feel that anyone who is able to sense deeply enough, this is what they'll sense. So, I said 15 or 20 minutes. I really don't want this to go a lot longer, but the obvious question for those who haven't run away screaming or, headed to find pitchforks and torches, the obvious question is, how do those two things link? Right? All of these people fascinated with slavery and playing with it like it's a simple game mechanic. How cool is that? You can buy and sell slaves. And the fact that slavery and the energies of it come from the female. I see at least two, though I sense more, ways that they're connected. One, the feminist movement in your world has made great efforts to repress the more aggressive expressions of male energy, to make men more quiet and well-behaved, and to find those who aren't willing to do so, and to ridicule them to the point where they're no longer socially acceptable beings. You have to be kind of an outcast if you're not a feminist. Right? Some big bearded bastard riding around on a motorcycle with, fleas in his beard and leather armor. If you're not a feminist. I'm not a feminist, not anymore. But see, the male energy's been repressed. And I have a feeling that in most of these games, if what they were saying were things that came from the male energies, savagery that came from the male side, people would say, oh, this is fucked up, this is wrong, I'm not having anything to do with that. But through it all, there's been this constant idea, and I've heard it so many times in my life, that if we all just were more female and, worshipped the goddess energy in the world, that everything would be fine. It has left in us all a blind spot to the savage things that come out of that so-called goddess energy. And slavery comes from that goddess energy. So people are vulnerable to it. I have also noted, see, I said there were two things here that I've found about how these base ideas link. The one is that people have been made immune to things that come from the female. And the other is that every single game that I have found that actively explores and exploits slavery is a space game. Now, it's possible that in some of the historical simulators, the war simulators, there are many different Roma games where you play as a city in Rome and build up an army and go conquer the world. It's likely that there's slavery in there. And if I were to guess, it should be, because that was part of the history. But see, I have watched several people play these games, and not once have I noticed the mechanic of slavery. I've watched several different games. I can think of 5 or 6 different Rome reenactment games in the last 5 years, and lots of people playing them, and not once have I noticed slavery in every single one of these ET type Explore the Universe games. Slavery's a given. So, why? Why just the ET games? And if anybody's not freaked out, or if anybody knows me well, right, you know where I'm going next. If you're not already freaked out. We learn, humans, by imprinting on the energy of our parents before we learn anything else. And the most savage imprints, the most intense imprints, are ones that no one knows how to deal with. So we don't ground them and let them go. They simply get passed down generation to generation. And humanity is an engineered species. The gentle, good-natured Neanderthal types were engineered to make humans. And they were engineered by an extraterrestrial race that used humans as slaves. You see, if there's anyone still listening to me talk, this is good news for you. Because now I'm talking about aliens, you can just call me crazy and ignore the rest of what I said. Right? But this is the problem. That is where these savage pieces in the male and female energy got broken when humans were re-engineered by a savage species. And it is not the fault of women or the fault of men that these things got encoded on the female side. They ended up there. It's sort of irrelevant. Right? What's important now is not why they're there or who's to blame. It's simply that we become aware of them, that you find in yourself the savage piece that somewhere deep inside would approve of slavery or warfare, and begin to change it, because it is in all of us. And I feel that because humanity hasn't remembered this trauma, right? There are a few exceptions. There are some kind of nutty folks writing crazy books who have been for 50 years or so about how the Sumerians were taken over by this reptilian ancient race and so on. For the most part, humanity has fought this. They're blind to it because they cannot accept this is part of their past. And because of it is, every time they think of space, every time they try to explore space, not as, intelligent scientists, but as kids. Let's go play a game. That buried trauma of slavery comes up. And it will continue to do so. Like any trauma from childhood. This is the childhood of your species. Until your species has remembered this and begun to integrate this and let it go, this savagery is going to continue to come up. Now, I have done so much lately to begin to eradicate the savagery. However, I feel it's gonna be necessary to actually not just trust some crazy fellow on an audio recording, but to look inside every person who's aware and see if you can find in there, perhaps not the memory of some reptilian aliens making slaves out of people, but the emotional repercussions, the sort of, if you were abused as a child, you would have these feelings. To find these feelings in yourself, to experience them and to begin to let them go. I feel like it's going to be necessary. Either for key people who can lead your world, or for everybody, or for enough people, or something. I've done it. I found these things and it shocked the hell out of me. It really made my life difficult until I decided to accept them. Because clearly I remember them. But I feel like it's going to be necessary. And it's going to keep showing up in the children's games until we can find a way to acknowledge it and treat it. And I don't yet have an answer for how that's to be done. How to acknowledge it or treat it. So, what I recommend is that you look for it. Whoever you are, if you hear me talking, you look in yourself. Forget men versus women. Right? Forget all that shit. Just look in yourself for the male energies in yourself. The places that they're stuck, that they're bent, that there's something wrong. For the female energies in yourself, for the places where there's something stuck. And see if you're able, in your dreams, in your deep work, in some way to go back and remember this tragedy which you may not even have been there, but it's been handed down by imprinting, parent to child, parent to child. See if you can find somewhere deep inside these energies and begin to notice them. And as you notice them, you will begin to let them go. And I do not at this point have elegant or eloquent answers. I have only what I sense, and what I sense is savage and brutal and difficult. However, that all these games are bringing up this stuff means that at some level people are remembering. Right? Like, oh goodness, I've just slipped her name. There's a woman who wrote Catastrophobia. She says that all of you think the world's going to end, but really, you're remembering a past catastrophe. As a species, you're remembering it, and it's giving you nightmares. If you can remember it and let the energies go, you'll be free. I feel very similarly about this. We're concerned, humans are concerned, that aliens are going to invade and make slaves out of everybody if we don't have big enough guns. But the fact is, we're not fearing the future. We're remembering the past. And we need to remember the past, where aliens came and humans didn't have big enough guns. And they made slaves out of people. And the entire history of the human race was shaped by their ugly meddling. We need to remember this so that we can begin to let this trauma go. And that humans then can begin to forgive and to heal, so that over the next few years, as humanity becomes aware of all the other species out there, they can enter that vast galactic world without the fear, without the trauma, without the pain. They can enter it as children, because they will be exploring something new. And the way to get there is not something I yet have answers to communicate. Again, all I recommend is you look for these things in yourself and become aware of them. You look for these things or the symptoms of them in the people you work with. And you watch for things like these games where these symptoms show up. And as they come up, you make note of them. And begin, hopefully, if not to change them, at least to develop awareness. Because awareness is almost always the beginning of real change.